Welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast, where we tackle issues at the intersection of leadership, faith, and culture. I'm your host, Rob Shields, Vice President of Strategy at 1110 Leadership, and I'm joined by my co-host, founder and CEO of 1110 Leadership, David Spickard. Proverbs 1110 lays out a bold and countercultural vision. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. We're here to ask, what does it look like practically to be this type of leader? Leaders willing to invest everything they have so that everyone around them can thrive. Join us on the journey as we lean in, listen, and learn how to become Proverbs 11:10 kind of leaders. The kind of leaders that make our cities rejoice. David.
Hey, Rob.
How are you, my friend?
I'm great, Rob. How are you?
I'm good. I'm doing well. Our guest today definitely was firing on all cylinders. So I'm really excited to introduce him to our listeners.
Yeah, Jon Houghton is just a really incredible leader who has come across our path as we have been engaging in worlds of understanding leadership, and particularly in spaces where people are being very intentional about what it means to be just. As the CEO of the Holy Post media company, and then also director of Chicago Fellowship, he brings a unique experience to our conversation today. We could have gone in a lot of different directions, a lot of topics. So we try to go deep where it made sense and hit on the things that we think our listeners would be really interested in. But it's one of those where we're getting back to a little bit of our just discussions. It's exciting to get back into talking about the things that we as leaders think about in order to be just. And so Jon brings a wealth of perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, his bio alone, there's just a lot that he's done and experienced that he just brings a lot to a leadership conversation. And our listeners are in store for a really full one. He truly was firing on all cylinders. So for those of you who are maybe less familiar with Jon, he does serve as the CEO of the Holy Post, a multimedia company helping people imagine life with God in a post-Christian culture. He's also the director of the Chicago Fellowship, which is a community of leaders seeking to live out grace through justice and compassion. And so they convene a lot of leaders in the Chicago community, wrestle through leadership issues, and also are trying to rejoice the city in ways that he talks about in this conversation. And so obviously that meant we had a lot to talk about, David, when it comes to the overlap with our approach, both to our work, but also to our just leadership groups, and the importance of really living these principles out in the context of community. Jon also knows a lot about community because he spent over 2 decades on staff with Young Life, and most recently as the regional director in Chicago. He's got a master's in theology from Fuller Seminary. He is married to his wife, Annie, who founded the Field School on Chicago's West Side, and together they are raising 4 kids. He is very involved in the Chicago community, but still carves out a ton of time to thinking about all things NBA, which, David, I know we were pleasantly surprised. I bet our listeners are wondering, how did it go there? Did it zigzag and land with the NBA? Yes, that's exactly what happened.
Well, it was pretty impressive that we held off until the very end.
That's true. Those were the questions that were really burning that you wanted to pepper him with, but you showed a lot of great self-restraint, David. But yeah, Jon's one of those guys that his energy is undeniable. I think our listeners are going to really enjoy hearing from his perspective. We're really grateful to be even just in community with him from afar here in North Carolina and thinking through how we can learn from each other and the work that we're doing in different contexts. Without further ado, here's our conversation with Jon Houghton.
Jon, welcome to the 1110 Leadership Podcast.
Great. Happy to be here.
So we're really excited for you to be here with us today. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here, and I think you'll experience I'm excited to be here as well because these are some of my favorite topics.
Yeah, that's great. Ours too. Let's jump in. I'm really curious in terms of how you would describe your leadership journey and how you've ended up in the leadership roles that you have currently with Holy Post and with Chicago Fellowship. And just describe that for us, and maybe even some of the things that get you excited about both of those and how you're living out what you believe are your gifts in each of those places.
Yeah, I've had really my whole life, I've had sort of an embarrassment of riches of people that have invested in me in different ways, and therefore some point along the way became like just such a student of leadership in addition to being hopefully a practicer of leadership, but obsessed with reading leadership books for a long time. I actually read fewer books now in that way than I did before probably, but just had people that were constantly investing in me in that way. And over time, just in the way that it happened for me, then the opportunity to lead and develop others like people did for me became so life-giving. So just the kind of obsessed with the idea of helping people become who they're capable of becoming. And so I have found different ways to live out what I guess I would say is that calling of helping people become who they're capable of becoming. For most of that, for the first 20 years of my career, that was with Young Life. So ministry for high school, middle school students, college students. I always felt like I had good job security in that because I liked raising money. I liked developing people. Then about 3 years ago, I shifted over to leading Chicago Fellowship, which is a ministry of men in greater Chicago that generally would say we're just trying to help people more faithfully follow Jesus in all areas of their life. And then as the CEO of Holy Post Media company that we think of our audience largely as disillusioned Christians and trying to help them reconcile their faith with what they see of Christians in the world. Very different in some ways and very similar in this sense of like all of them are helping people become who they're capable of becoming. And for me, that includes being a follower of Christ. So they were all helping people more faithfully follow Jesus, which is a path, a part of being all of who they're capable of becoming. That is some of my journey. I also coached basketball along the way. There's all of these things were kind of leadership in different manifestations.
So just building off on that, there's a lot of alignment with the idea of developing people and having a fuller experience of their faith and how they engage with the world. What is motivating you in both of those spaces?
I think a lot of what kind of gets me out of bed in the morning is a desire for people, especially historically marginalized people, to flourish. I have been called and equipped helping the more privileged people to know their role as stewards and joining with God and restoring the world to how it's supposed to be. That this kind of more robust understanding of what it means to be a follower of Christ. That to be a follower of Christ includes working for the flourishing of our neighbor. And so one of the ways of doing that would be there's 40 million people that have left the church in America in the last 25 years. A lot of that, I would say, is because the church has not been faithful to what the scriptures call us to, especially in our treatment of historically marginalized people. That causes people to say, I don't want to have any part of that thing. So we've been unfaithful to who God calls us to be. People are leaving the church in part because of watching people really live unfaithfully to who Christ calls us to live. And then as they leave the church, they discover that it's not working for them. It's not working for them outside of communities. And I don't think what it's going to take is a better marketing campaign from the American church to get people back into the church. I think what it takes to get people back into the church or to close the back door of that exodus is God's people being faithful to who God calls us to be. And part of what we do in the media company is to say these disillusioned people that get turned off by often what they've been sold as this kind of bundle too frequently of right-wing politics and Christianity, kind of at its worst, Christian nationalism. So they push away from that only to discover, now I'm rudderless. And if we can present to them a faithful vision that holds to theological convictions of theirs and also has this pro-neighbor posture, we can close the back door of the church and that those people then will be working for the flourishing of their neighbor. So one way is for wealthy, white, conservative Christians to know that our role as Christians is to be working for the flourishing of their neighbor. And one way to do that is through a media company. Another way to do that is through a gathering of men that have influence in different ways and to also invite them into a more robust understanding of what it means to follow Christ. That's how the two work together and make me excited about doing it. And then my role in each of those, I'm not a media expert. I'm not a great public speaker. I think I do two things: organizational leadership, operationalize some of those lofty ideas, and then develop the people that are actually doing those things. So I'm playing the same role in both organizations, both of which are trying to help marginalized communities flourish by having a full understanding of the gospel.
John, I love the both-handedness. We say both-handedness a lot on this podcast because it's usually the answer to a lot of the questions we raise. Is it this or is it this? And it feels like that's all throughout Scripture as well. And
Totally.
I love the both-handedness of even your calling, right? Of we're coming in at 10,000 feet and being able to really put out truth in a way that is broad and
Yep.
can be far reaching and can lean into maybe even some controversial topic and stir the pot a bit and get people talking in a way that maybe that doesn't happen within traditional Sunday morning church for whatever
Yep.
reason. But then you're not staying there. You're embodying leadership on the ground in relationship with other people up close, right? Where you can't just be prophetic, mic drop, and then just leave. Like you are wrestling through these principles. I love that, because sometimes when I'm listening to just a podcaster, I'm like, do you really get close to people? Do you know what it's like? And I love that that informs your leadership of Holy Post, and that you are keeping an eye on the ground, and not more than I, but like in relationship. And I wonder, first, I kind of have a two-part question. Part one, you're jumping straight into the just leadership waters, which is where we love to go on this podcast. We call it the 11:10 Leadership Podcast because it's an orientation around Proverbs 11:10. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. And that's the vision that you're painting in what you're explaining. That's really the call of the church. Everything in the Bible is the call of the church, but it includes Proverbs 11:10.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Which means leveraging your power, wealth, and influence, whatever amount you have. So I guess my question is, like, when did that spark really light for you in your journey? Because it feels like we're always looking for trying to replicate that in others, knowing that has to be a work of the Spirit. So it'd just be helpful whenever we can get opportunity where clearly the spark is lit for you. It's okay if it's more than one thing, or when you think about how God has fanned that into flame in your life. That's part one. And then because you wear so many hats, I think you can hold space for this part two, because you strike me as a really smart guy. Like, how do you think about creating the conditions for that spark to ignite for other people through your work?
Yeah, so I love both of these. I think David Swanson might have been our initial mutual friend that connected us.
Yes.
I hear David sometimes say that it's like people need a second conversion experience. And so the first one is maybe this kind of like ticket to heaven idea of what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. And then there's the second conversion of like, when did it click that, to use the language I'm using here, that working for the flourishing of our neighbor is part of what it means to be a follower of Christ. And over thought like, man, I have some ideas of why this is the case. And I know there's some kind of second conversion. I'm not trying to say that I'm absent from that need, but I just feel very grateful that the way that I was first introduced to what it meant to be a follower of Christ didn't require a second conversion. I think that I was introduced initially to this more full, robust gospel. And mostly what I would give credit to that is who my young life leader was when I was in high school. Like that was deeply formative of it, that there wasn't, deconstructing is such a popular term. I'm not saying that I've only ever inhabited healthy faith communities, but basically I would say that. I empathize with people that's not the case. I empathize with the people that maybe have been sold an overly simplistic gospel, but I wasn't. And so then it's almost like the second conversion experience for me was finding out, wait, not everybody was told this from the beginning. And so I have moments along the way, the being proximate and in relationship with people that were in historically marginalized communities, largely through the elementary school that our kids went to when we lived in Indianapolis, and we have a similar one in Chicago. So there were things that went, but I didn't need a second spark as much. I think. I want to say that humbly, I more feel grateful that is mostly the case. How do you create the conditions for it? I heard this podcast years ago from the Liturgist podcast that I didn't even listen to this all that frequently. But this was around first go round of Black Lives Matter, like post Ferguson. And they were talking about, and I know this is not exactly right, but basically that based on brain science, like when somebody feels shame, the synapses in their brain stop firing. Like they can't hear the next thing. And so what happens in these sort of performative cultures, of which I can be a part of, I can be guilty of being this kind of activist, performative, virtue signaling kind of way. We, in leadership, maybe will say strong things. Let me paint the picture of a room full of Young Life staff when I'm leading the team in Chicago, a racially diverse group of people. And it felt like every time the day before the team was about to meet, there'd be some racial incident that would hit the news the night before. There's a police shooting. There's a political figure that says something. And so I wake up the next morning a new team of people that I'm responsible for, and I have to decide, am I going to address this situation or not? I inhabit a lot of communities that would say silence is complicity. If you don't say anything, then you're complicit in these things. I feel persuaded by that. I understand that point, while also feeling like I don't want to shut down the synapses in the brain of the very people that I'm trying to influence. So here I am in front of 40 people, and am I going to address this thing or not? And if I address it, am I going to say it in strong enough language, let me be blunt again, that the African Americans in the room are going to be satisfied that I'm fully an ally of theirs, in which case I'm going to shut down the very people who I'm trying to influence in this? Or am I going to be guilty of overly sensitive to white fragility and not say something that would hurt the feelings of the white people in the room? Is this making sense?
Yep.
So that's the conditions, right? So probably the next logical question, so then what do you do in that situation? And I have a feeling this is like the area of expertise that I need to be learning more from you. I think what a lot of white people need to do is embrace the inefficiency of the important kind of racial awareness work. I need to have that conversation that I just said with those folks as individually as possible. So in that case, I need to talk with the African American folks in the room to say, here's the way I'm thinking about addressing this. How does that sound to you? I'm willing to say it a little stronger, but I'm afraid the folks in that corner of the room would shut down if I did that. That takes a lot more time than whether saying the thing strongly, shutting them down, but getting my virtue signaling points with these folks. And so I'll shut up and say that dance right there is creating the culture that people could get that spark.
Yeah. And it really is a dance. And having to be in that position wakes you up to the complexity of it, the challenge of it. And we're finding that many of our leaders that we're working with have found themselves in those settings where they're having to respond in a way that's surprising because there haven't been these cultural moments quite as much that are visible, or these events that are happening. And early on in our groups, when a lot of these things were happening, we really needed to coach our leaders on addressing that. And the first response was, oh gosh, I didn't know I needed to say something. As I think about that, I'm curious, Jon, to hear your perspective on what you're learning from your audience in both spaces. I'm sure you have some indication in your Holy Post media world, even though it's broad and you're distant from your audience, you have a sense.
People still send mean emails, David. Don't worry.
No doubt.
What you're getting from that audience, and then just your experience on the ground level in Chicago Fellowship.
Yeah.
Where do you feel like you have tailwinds? The wind is behind you, and there's some momentum, and there's some energy and receptivity. And where are the winds pushing against you?
Yeah.
The resistance, the questions, the concerns.
Yeah. So Emerson runs social media for Holy Post, and she just recently said, and I just think it's so profound. She said a few years ago for something like Holy Post, which Phil Vischer is the founder of it, the guy that created VeggieTales. So it probably started as like white evangelical royalty, and then was like very vocal about the ways that a lot of the mega movement is antithetical to the way of Jesus in the name of Jesus. And that's what we would want to call out as the times where we think that people are doing things in the name of Jesus that are antithetical to the way of Jesus. So we do that. And what Emerson said that I think is so profound is that there was a few years ago where the prophetic voice of Holy Post was a willingness to very directly call out those things, to call out MAGA, to call out Donald Trump in ways that it was antithetical to the way of Jesus. And she said, increasingly for our audience, I think the prophetic voice is actually one that also calls people to love their Christian nationalist neighbors, not to give them a pass, but send an email that you guys, I thought it was a benign marketing email. I'm really just trying to get people to sign up for Holy Post Plus. I was not trying to make some point here. That's for our more forward-facing hosts to do, is to make the more provocative points. The email was an old framework I've used for years about John chapter 8. And when Jesus says to the woman that had been caught in the act of adultery, go and leave your life of sin, the way that I hear his tone in that is one of heartbreak more than disappointment. They say that he's heartbroken. He's saying, go now, I have something better for you. And so I just say in this email, as we continue to call out things that are antithetical to the way of Jesus, I also pray that our hearts would break for those that have fallen for the idol of Christian nationalism, of this kind of political idolatry, that we would be heartbroken for them. Flood of emails upset with me because we're like I'm coddling or being soft on people that are Christian nationalists. Now, that has not been the case at all. But to even ask people to be heartbroken, to have some level of a broken heart for those that have fallen away from the way of Jesus, regardless of how it's manifested, is now the prophetic thing. We need to be paying attention. We need to be diagnosing what are actually the things. I think we have hardened people's hearts towards brothers and sisters that have fallen away. We should be protesting. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that. We should be fighting like crazy to protect our marginalized brothers and sisters. But my heart can still break for those that have fallen away from Jesus in that way. I'm just giving that as an example of trying to listen well enough to paying attention to our audience to say, how do we need to call them to be faithful in this moment? Yes, it means loving our immigrant neighbors and calling out when our immigrant neighbors are being treated inhumanely, for sure. I just also think it means, what is going on with the person that has become so hateful towards their refugee neighbor? What's going on with that person? I cannot stop myself from loving and caring about that person's heart as well.
Yeah, it's like Keller used to talk about the solution to intolerance is not intolerance. We're not allowed as Christians to be able to demonize anyone. And that starts by looking in the mirror. Yeah.
Yep.
John, I guess David got to do the bad cop question. I'll ask the good cop one. Then, like, where are the tailwinds? To the part two of that, right?
You did ask that.
Where do you feel like people are like giving the thumbs up emoji to you and saying that was awesome? That's a word where like the ground feels really fertile, either or for either of those roles that you're playing.
There's plenty of tailwinds. Let me do another headwind here, but like that same time that I got that email, I got another email from a person that had been a long time supporter, both financial and otherwise, of my wife and I in different ministry leadership things we've been a part of. Was concerned about the way that basically what's happening to my credibility by stepping into some of these spaces that we're in. And saying, you were better off when you were the safe guy that was just cheering everybody on. And this was, the email was generously worded and in partnership, so I'm not trying to be a martyr in this at all. But what was clear in this email to me was that the equation is mass appeal and mass credibility is the ultimate goal. And anything that shrinks that is problematic. Be careful of it. And again, I would go to John chapter 6 and say, these were difficult teachings, it says. And at this point, many people left Jesus. I am not trying to pare down the crowds intentionally. I don't like it when people say, oh, for pissing people off on the left and the right, we're probably doing something right. Not necessarily. You might just be a jerk. But I also don't think that mass appeal, the biggest audience, however you measure that, the biggest audience possible is the end goal of everything we do. I think faithfulness to Jesus ought to be the end goal. So when I say, oh, there's plenty of tailwinds, I'm trying to be less and less a person that measures that by saying, because more and more people are being involved in fill in the blank. No, it's like more and more faithfulness. I have story after story in both places, Chicago Fellowship and the relationships through that, and this broader media company where I would say the scales are coming off of people's eyes and they come alive at the idea that I'm invited into this broader story, a way more full story of what it means to follow Christ. I still am not giving us a very specific story of that. Let me try with one here that just one of our hosts just got a text from a pastor of a church saying that a person said, I'm showing up here because for the last 5 years, I had given up on the church, but I didn't stop listening to the Holy Post. And they didn't stop encouraging me to end up in embodied communities with other people that are more faithfully following Jesus. So I can't quit. So I'm here. And then now that person has just recently joined a small group at their church. And I'm like, that's what we're trying to do. We want to critique enough that we have credibility with disillusioned Christians, but we also don't want to just become this cesspool of complaining about aren't white evangelicals the worst. Credibility, but inviting them into life-giving spaces like the local church.
As you've really painted a picture of your environment, which is quite unique and comes with a lot of challenges just in terms of how you guys are pursuing your work. You're also leading teams. You're the leader of your group at Holy Post. You've developed a 3-part framework for leadership development around health, diagnosis, and prescription. Love for you to break that down and share how you've seen it help leaders grow.
When we're going into another topic that I get so passionate about. It's a framework that I can't unsee, that I think when individuals or organizations have no emotional margin, when they're unhealthy, then what you end up doing with people is you try to manufacture results. You try to squeeze results out of your people. I would say we cannot manufacture results. It doesn't work. And it's soul-sucking as a leader if all you're doing is just trying to manufacture results out of people. But if instead I invest my time and energy in helping people become who they're capable of becoming, then we likely get both the results we're looking for and a healthier person. That person is now also a healthier husband or father or sister or brother or citizen, and they're more effective. So way more life-giving to spend my time thinking about developing people. And the way that the framework works is if I'm not healthy myself, we could define that in a whole bunch of ways, but healthy enough that I have some emotional margin to think beyond myself. That's to steward my energy in a way that I can think beyond myself. What do I do with that now margin of emotional energy or time energy? I use it to diagnose. And here's what I mean by that is I think my biggest critique about a lot of leadership would be we want to prescribe universalized solutions to what are customized problems. I think it's lazy and ineffective leadership to prescribe the exact same thing without diagnosing. I think that a doctor gets paid for diagnosing correctly. If you already knew what somebody had, you would just match the medicine to whatever their diagnosis was. But I've got this, I'm pretty sure it's a herniated disc. I'm going to a doctor tomorrow. The doctor's likely going to ask me questions about my diet. And I'm like, oh, the pain's in my neck and in my shoulder. Why? Because they know more than me about what the things could be that are getting in the way of me being healthy. So as a leader, instead of prescribing universalized solutions, I want to provide customized solutions, which means I need to know my people well. I would say the framework, the lens that I cannot stop seeing is what gets in the way of Rob becoming who he's capable of becoming? What are the things that prevent Rob from being the most effective leader and person he's capable of being? Or what is Rob uniquely gifted at that he needs to be doing more of? That's the diagnosis step. I think once you figure that out, the prescription actually becomes pretty easy for that. And that's the coaching step. But most leaders, in my opinion, out of a desire for efficiency again, are prescribing universalized solutions. So let's intersect some of what we're talking about here with kind of racial justice and racial awareness kind of work is like, in Young Life, one of the things that you do is raise money. And if what we do is just keep saying, here's the case statement that you need, here's the glossy deck, here's the way that you need to fundraise, but we never talk about or pay attention to that there's actually oftentimes a huge power dynamic at play when a Black person is going into a wealthy white neighborhood and asking them for money. The hurdle of effectiveness there is oftentimes like there's a lot of stuff that you need to work through about what's going on in that power dynamic. And if we just keep saying, here's a glossy deck, go ask more people, we will end up with an unhealthy person and ineffective results. We skip the diagnosis step in that case.
Yeah, I'm tracking with you, John. We talk a lot about the qualities of just leadership, and we talk about quality one of seeing the whole playing field, seeing ourselves fully. You talk about fullness a lot, seeing others, and then seeing the whole community, which takes emotional intelligence. I love the term emotional margin. I've not, we talk about margin a lot, but I love that you're packaging it a little bit differently there to say it requires emotional margin to be able to diagnose. And I think as leaders, oftentimes people are listening to this podcast, they're doers, they're fixers, they're achievers, they're performers. And what you're saying is actually you need to create the space that is going to feel inefficient, but
Yes.
that is the most important space that you can carve out. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis's quote of like first things, second things. Like, ironically, if you do these first things first,
Yep.
you're going to get a lot of the second, not because your end game was to get to the second things, because that doesn't work. But if you sincerely care about
Yes.
those people and their fullness, that's going to activate a lot of cool second things as well that you didn't prioritize, but you got thrown in.
That's the part of why that whole thing is a cycle too, because it's like, I would want to critique both of these things that I'm about to say. And this is why it requires such wisdom. Again, I would say health of a leader to be able to have this wisdom is, on the one hand, let's go back to both the horror and in some ways glory days of that moment in time in 2020 when a lot of white Christians were waking up to racial injustice. And there was an openness and a receptivity to the idea that maybe there are systemic injustices in our country that need to be addressed and in our churches that need to be addressed. And there were a lot of well-intentioned white Christians. And I'm fine with the fact this is all about race. It's also, this is true in a lot more than this. But that are saying, somebody just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And on the one hand, that was well-intentioned and good, but you can't outsource your discernment. You have to be able to know your time and place and your giftedness and your community. And you have to do the hard work of saying, how do I steward those things in a way that are most effective where I am? Somebody else cannot tell you how to do it. That is lazy. It is our work to do that discernment. Okay. On the other hand, if all you do is think and strategize and stay in that diagnosis step forever and never move to action because you might screw it up, no matter how well-intentioned that is, nothing changes for the communities that you claim to care about. And so there has to be a courage, a wisdom to say inefficient, yes, but I am going to do something, and I'm going to trust that I will be received with grace if I hurt the very people that I'm trying to serve. That's been my experience over and over again. As I step out, I screw up a little bit, and over again, I'm received with grace by marginalized communities. So you cannot have inaction, but you cannot also say, somebody else just tell me what to do and I'll do it. You have to do both of those things. It has to be an ongoing cycle, which is what you guys are doing, I know, but I get worked up about it.
Jon, you just articulated the 4 qualities of a just leader in my book, which is starting with what Rob said, seeing the whole playing field, then building cultural competency, then giving power away, and then taking bold and courageous action.
Yeah.
Which really, we love formulas because we need some guidance, particularly when we're in situations where we're uncomfortable, we don't have experience. Our hope, and just like with your framework of leadership, is that the framework of those topics can allow people a pathway, but it doesn't get rid of the nuance and complexity and the fact that it's relational, centered on our hearts, how we understand the uniquenesses of each situation, each person, etc., to diagnose well, but then to be compelled to action. And hopefully God gives us a real care and compassion for these issues and for the people, so that, of course, we're going to act. What else would we do?
Exactly.
And it's not because we're checking off a box, but because it's staring at us right in the face.
And it's who we are, right?
It's who we are. Yeah.
Yep.
Jon, we could talk about these things forever.
Yes, I could.
So we always do a bottom line at the end of our podcast, big idea, thought, maybe even a word of encouragement for our listeners around the things that we've been discussing today. If you were to have a bottom line, what would that be?
Yeah, I think this, both for our leadership of ourselves and our leadership of others, is just feeding that framework of helping us become who we're capable of becoming, kind of this ever growing in our Christ-likeness, growing in our effectiveness and leadership because of what you just said, David. It's like these situations require wisdom, and that's an ever-growing need. So I don't ever want to lose this obsession for myself and for others of this kind of continuing growing, being transformed into his image. And I would say that's, to me, is the bottom line of all of this, whether that's my time with Young Life or with Holy Post or with Chicago Fellowship, is both for myself and for others, for this ongoing, forever, receiving God's grace when we fall short, but also ever growing in becoming who we're capable of.
Fantastic.
Bottom line follow-up, who's winning the NBA championship this year?
Oh my gosh. The Thunder look hard to beat. Okay, the Thunder look hard to beat. I could tell a long leadership love story of the Boston Celtics for me because I'm become pretty good friends with Brad Stevens, who's now president of basketball operations there, and one of the best leaders I've ever met or observed. So I'm just like a diehard Celtics. There's too many injuries. The Celtics can't get it done this year.
Yeah. It's tough.
Yeah.
You need both ACLs from your superstar to be able to have a true shot in today's NBA.
Yeah. That was tough way to end the season.
We'll let you send this episode to Brad, and then you can tell Brad to be our next guest to help unpack the secrets of leadership, because I think David would love to nerd out. He's a big Barkley guy, big steam room guy. I don't know if that's a podcast that fits in the Holy Post network or not, but that's on the dream list.
One of the ways that I connected with Brad Stevens was he's just like way too humble and kind, and we don't have time to tell the whole story, but one of the ways we connected, I even said to him, like, why did you say yes to this? I said, I'll fly out and spend a day with you. Why did you say yes? He said, well, it's good for me to talk to people in other industries. At the time I was with Young Life, he said, this just helps me grow too, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, it's just a humble, nice thing for him to say. But then we spent probably 2 to 3 hours of our time talking about the time he was coaching the Celtics, about the reality that he too leads predominantly adolescent 20s, predominantly African-American men, and that they need to be flourishing in the full area of their lives for them to perform well on the basketball court. Especially at the time, still to this day, there's a stigma in the Black community about mental health language. So much of what they would do with the Celtics is help players with their mental health so that they could perform best on the court, but in a way that was not using stigmatizing language about that. So we found this shared connection that what I'm trying to do at the time of leading a diverse staff of 20-something Young Life leaders, he's saying, you and I are doing the same thing. I'm like, not exactly, but I'm here for it.
Whatever you say, Brad.
Yeah. So I'm sincere in saying he would be a great guest for it because he was thinking at different levels than just how we defend a pick and roll. Now, he can also talk about how to defend the pick and roll. But
yeah, he was thinking about the whole person.
Yeah.
If only that shot had gone in and they had taken down Duke. That's only, as Tar Heel fans, that was what we were all.
Amen. I was at that game.
No. My goodness. We're trying to conclude. You keep just pulling up threads for us to pull on here, John. But thank you so much. It's been such a blessing. Appreciate you just firing on all cylinders on all things leadership. And you talk about fullness, but to me, this is like a very full conversation because the way that you seamlessly work back and forth between this is what it talks about to have emotional margin in our leadership and here's how that impacts racial justice. Like, to me, that embodies the 11-10 journey. That it is all one conversation. And I think you modeled that principle really beautifully today. So grateful for you, grateful for all the work that you're doing. And hopefully our paths can maybe connect in person sometime in Chicagoland.
Sounds good. I'm in for it.
To learn more about 1110 Leadership, visit our website at 1110leadership.com. That's the numerals 11, then spelled out TEN leadership.com. That's 11 TEN leadership.com. There you'll find more resources to equip you on the journey of becoming an 1110 leader. You can also get connected to our growing leadership network. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. To help others find us, you can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.